Welcome to Global View. Today on the show, we're joined by a man who has seen intelligence world from inside and isn't afraid to speak the truth about it. Former CIA analyst and counterterrorism expert, Larry Johnson has worked with both the CIA and the State Department. He's become a vocal critic of intelligence manipulation, foreign policy blunders, and the weaponization of classified information to political gain. In an era of disinformation and deep state narratives, Larry offers rare insight and unapologetic clarity. Thanks so much for joining the show.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Larry. I would like to open this conversation by having you introduce your background and how did you get started at the CIA and what drew you to the intelligence world?
Well, I needed a job back in 1985, so that was that was the incentive. I spent a year in what they call the career trainee program. We got a full exposure to all four directorates of the Central Intelligence Agency at the time. Then I entered in 1986 in September as the Honduran analyst. This is during the middle of Central America being the focal point of U.S. foreign policy with the wars in Central America. I left the agency in 1989, moved down to the State Department Office of Counterterrorism, spent 4 years there. And then I started doing consulting work in the end of 93, first of 94. And part of my consulting duties I kept my clearances, top secret, compartmented clearances, scripting terrorism exercises for the special operations community. So I still had access to classified information back in 2015 and into 2016 when George ran into the wrath of what I call the CIA and the FBI.
Thank you. So you have seen both the good side of the intelligence world purpose, which is target terrorism and fight it, but also the weaponization of the intelligence services to a political hand. When did this switch happen and when did politics take control over intelligence agencies?
Well, it's been actually a long-standing problem, probably since the inception of CIA, where the politics of operations, the politics or the policies advocated by a president take precedence over the actual intelligence. So as an example, during the Vietnam War, the analysts that were working the issue of the strength of the Viet Cong, an analyst by the name of Sam Adams, they came up with evidence, and they believed was solid, that the U.S. Army, U.S. military command was lying about the number of Viet Cong casualties. They claimed, oh, we're beating them, they're racking up body counts. And this analyst Sam Adams said, no, you're not. They're actually a lot stronger than you claim. And it turned out they had the Tet Offensive in '68, where the Viet Cong came out of nowhere. I thought they were all dead. So this kind of, if you will, political pressure on intelligence analysts has been prevalent throughout. But what we saw that happened in 2015 when John Brennan was the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, he was closely tied to the Hillary Clinton campaign. And I know from another CIA colleague that in the summer of 2015, John Brennan, excuse me, set up a specific task force. A task force brings together different parts of the CIA as well as people from other agencies like the FBI, National Security Agency, Defense Intelligence Agency. He set up excuse me, a task force specifically to collect intelligence on all of the presidential candidates at the time. Remember, the Republicans were in a primary. They didn't know who the nominee was going to be. And the Democrats were having a primary with Bernie Sanders. So they were collecting intelligence on Bernie Sanders. As that process evolved over time and it became clear that Trump was the likely nominee, then this intelligence collection effort with the FBI, with foreign intelligence, was zeroed in. And then the full weight of law enforcement and intelligence operations were brought to bear to try to destroy Donald Trump. And your husband, George, is a casualty of that.
Larry, first question on what you just said. Has this ever happened before in modern American history? Let's start there.
No, nothing like this.
Okay.
Yeah, the closest there is a case to be made that there was a coup, if you will, against Richard Nixon, the whole Watergate affair, because several of the individuals that were directly involved with that also had links to the Kennedy assassination from the CIA. But this was the first time that I've ever seen anything on this scale, the level of weaponization. I mean, they went after you, they went after Mike Flynn, they went after several others. They tried to do a variety of entrapments. Roger Stone was on the target list. This was not just one person exercising a grievance. This was a coup. This was an internal coup, and they failed initially. And so that's why they continued the effort even after Trump was elected to try to destroy his credibility.
The way I see it is the stakes were incredibly high between the first George W. Bush administration and the second George W. Bush administration. And I actually worked with many of his former cabinet members at the Hudson Institute. That's how I started my career. So right after Bush left office and Obama was in office, those were my colleagues. But you never heard stories of George W. doing this between his first and his second term, because that's what I asked you. Even though the stakes were incredibly high, you had the war on terrorism, you had the Patriot Act, and you had to continue this type of momentum, I would assume, into the second term to consolidate the new legislatures, the new America that came about after 9/11. Why? The question I have based on that premise is, why were the stakes even higher to assure a third Obama term with Clinton in 2016, that the CIA, the FBI, and global intelligence would basically fall on the sword the way they did for this third term? What was it that made this so important for them to break the rules, to destroy their credibility, and ultimately potentially face criminal violations?
Trump was not willing to continue the needless wars overseas. He had made that very clear. And in fact, he made it clear that he thought NATO were a bunch of bums, freeloading bums at that, and that they needed to pay their own way. So that's why, in particular, MI6 was so energized in this process. And the coordination that took place in London between MI6 head as well as with Gina Haspel, who was the chief of station at the time. She later became CIA director. They took advantage of the fact that the British could collect intelligence on American citizens. Now, I don't know at what point you were in the UK in this, July, August of 2015, but normally CIA and the National Security Agency, they cannot collect on American citizens. They couldn't target you specifically. But you can get around that. You can go to the Brits and say, hey, you got this George Papadopoulos guy. Take a look at him. And so then they can mount up, and as they did, they mounted a full-scale intelligence operation. They danced people into you, including Joseph Massoud from the British side, Stephen Halper from the U.S. side. Halper was operating in concert with the FBI. Again, all designed to entrap you as a way to using your so-called crimes as evidence against Donald Trump. And it was pure evil what was done.
I think you just dropped a major bombshell, and I just want our viewers to understand what you're saying here, and correct me if I'm wrong. You're saying that in the summer of 2015, approximately a day or two, or maybe a week after Donald Trump went down the escalators and announced that he was running for the president, when I reached out to Corey Lewandowski when I was based in London at the time to say I'm interested in joining this campaign, I just left the Hudson Institute, that message and other messages, because I'm assuming I wasn't the only person on planet Earth who wanted to join the Trump campaign in the summer of 2015, that all of those messages were being intercepted.
Correct.
British intelligence?
Correct. Yep. British intelligence was in, and they'd probably even been tasked by CIA to do so. So go ahead.
I'm sorry. Now, you also pointed at something that I would really like to draw the attention of our audience at. You mentioned Joseph Mifsud as part of the British Western intelligence.
Right.
So this is something that we've been actually vocal about ever since this phone investigation started back on 2016. I was one of the witnesses of Joseph Mifsud because I used to know him far before he even met George, and I testified to the FBI his connection to the Western intelligence. So that's something that costed me media defamation and political persecution as well, like persecution. So how the truth teller have been affected into exposing, because today we know, thanks to people like George and myself and other people who have been fighting back those techniques, the machine of the DOJ has been drawn against us and people like us. On the Ukraine side, we have Rudy Giuliani, who has been persecuted to be an agent only to exposing everything was happening with Biden in Ukraine. On this side, we have been like this massive character assassination and misinformation operation. So how do you see the collusion between the narratives that this intelligence agency set for political reasons and the collusion of the DOJ? At the same time,
they were working hand in glove.
I see.
In fact, Brennan went out of his way to try to pretend that, we didn't know anything about these operations. In fact, we tried to warn that the FBI was spreading misinformation, but the reality was something else. That, like I said, this was not the action of one individual. This was a coordinated, integrated operation that one of the reasons Peter Strzok was the key contact at the FBI for this is Strzok, by virtue of his role dealing in counterintelligence, had access out at CIA and was working with CIA. Just not a coincidence. It's a natural, how they come together. And this, again, this, not to get off topic, but another example is the death of Seth Rich, which supposedly killed in a domestic robbery in Washington, D.C. Then why in the name of God is Peter Strzok, who's in charge of counterintelligence and foreign operations, getting copied on emails and communicating with the Washington field office? In fact, why is the FBI even involved in this case? Not to mention Peter Strzok. So, like I said, this thing was much broader than just going after George. This was an entire effort to destroy Trump, and they failed. I mean, that's what is sort of shocking. Even though that they were able to take down Michael Flynn early on, they did handcuff Trump in his first term, but this was criminal activity at the highest level. So now what we have with Pam Bondi at DOJ and Seth and Kash Patel as FBI director, they actually are taking steps to make sure this never happens again, and they're going to declassify at least the FBI files. So there should be, I would hope that there's grounds in those files for you to take legal action, George, against the FBI. They owe you some money.
You mentioned declassifying the FBI files, but then you also mentioned CIA's involvement and Five Eyes. So are we missing the big picture here? Are we focusing on the trees and not the forest?
Yeah.
Or in these declassified files of the FBI, will we get the full picture?
No, you only get part of the story.
We need to have everything.
And that's so the CIA files on this have to be released. All of Gina Haspel's communications when she was chief of station. CIA is going to fight like hell to keep that from coming out, because what it will show is that our intelligence agency, not just the CIA primarily, was involved in collusion and conspiracy with the Brits to collect and disseminate this information. That's one of the reasons that then, I believe, Mike Rogers, who was head of the National Security Agency, he actually went to Trump early on to alert him to the fact that there had been this illegal spying conducted on Trump and his associates. We've never heard much more about that. That just sort of disappeared, went away. But it's an important story.
It's actually very important,
Very
and
important.
it really points out at the need to provide accountability until we'll clean the situation and will hold the people responsible accountable. We don't have a closure. And this has been probably the biggest scandal in American history. No matter how much
course.
lawfare, but the Russiagate saga has been absolutely outrageous and unprecedented. I don't know,
Yeah.
you are an expert in the field, and I would like to have your take about the gravity of what really happened that has been normalized by the headlines. No, everybody accept that it was a phony investigation, but we have to understand how this extend, how deep it's the corruption, and how it led to mistrust of the institution.
Yeah. So if your listeners and viewers go to my website, sonar21.com, simply search on the term Papadopoulos or Halper or Massoud, and it'll pop up. I was writing extensively on this back in 2016, 2017, trying to blow the whistle that, hey, this is an intelligence operation being directed against the president. I was on RT in March of 2017 and trying to flag this fact. In fact, shortly after that appearance, I called up Devin Nunes. Devin Nunes at the time was on the House Intelligence Committee, and I went in and told him, I said, "Hey, this is what's going on. The Brits are spying on Trump." I gave him the name of a CIA contact that I had that he could talk to.
Now, this was in what year? You're
March 2017.
2017. Okay.
So it was short. So 2 days after that meeting, I've still got it on my phone for the text exchanges with him at the time. He went down to the White House and was able to review some files and some information that was made available to him to confirm what I was telling him. Well, when he came out of that meeting, he was immediately attacked by the press. If you remember, it was quite a show. But out of that, he then tasked Kash Patel, okay, start this investigation. So in a way, I'm the one that kicked off Devin Nunes starting this whole investigation by going in and briefing him, saying, look, here's where you need to look. Look under this rock. This is what they're doing. He had no idea. He had no idea until I told him about it.
So do you think Kash Patel will deliver justice since you witnessed all that was wrong with this investigation?
Yes. Yeah. No, I actually do. I think Kash, he understands what's at stake here, and he understands how widespread this corruption was. This involved Department of Justice. This involved the FBI. This involved the CIA. This involved the National Security Agency. This involved the Pentagon. This was corruption on a grand scale, and it was genuine meddling in the election, but it wasn't the Russians doing the meddling. It was our own government officials.
Yeah. Now, I believe that the reason that this premeditated operation happened, because this wasn't even a hoax. People call it a hoax. It wasn't actually a hoax. It was actually an operation.
Yeah,
It was set in place, like you just explained, articulated very well. And I've always thought the same exact thing, just based off the fact that even before the Washington Post knew I was part of the campaign, I had many operatives running into me in Rome, London. So obviously something had been set in motion much before that entire thing transpired. So do you think that the reason that President Trump has this acrimonious relationship now with the UK, Australia, and parts of Europe is because he is aware finally of what you're here to tell our viewers, or is he still aloof of what's going on?
No, I think he fully understands that the Brits through MI6 with Christopher Steele, again, another sweetheart, And Alexander Downer, I mean, Downer was, again, he goes and, claims that, oh, yeah, this was a real, he waits a month, a month until after a meeting. Oh, yeah, this was, or 2 months. Yeah, this George Papadopoulos is working with the Russians. I mean, it was all a scripted lie.
So
Everybody had a role to play, and you from your position, you get these invitations. Hey, let's meet for lunch, and then they come in there. Hey, I'd like you to meet Putin's niece.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a niece.
Very bizarre.
there was, let's say we live in Los Angeles, we will find yet a script writer that is so creative as that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. The sloppiness of it was actually somewhat remarkable.
Yeah.
But May, if you will, May of 2016 was a critical kickoff period for a lot of these actions, because that's when they stepped up their efforts to go after you. That's when the Seth Rich actually leaked the files to WikiLeaks. He stole the DNC files, just got them to WikiLeaks, and so the CIA with CrowdStrike they mounted an operation to create a story that, oh, this was stolen by the Russians, and this was a Russian hacking operation. There were a couple of other activities that took place. I haven't refreshed my memory on them in that May timeframe. I think Carter Page was also another one. So once it became clear that Trump was definitely going to be the nominee, man, they opened the floodgates. It was just shortly after this time that the Steele dossier surfaced. So it was just one thing after another. They were sort of throwing Jello at the wall, hoping something sticks.
They say that Steele was paid by the DNC, but as an ex-MI6 officer, don't you think that the British government was really instructing him of how to interfere in the 2016 election, or was he just a paid hitman?
No, well, no, actually, I think it was a combination of both. They in the conversations between CIA and MI6, question would come up. Okay, who can we use that's not directly tied, that's not currently an active MI6 officer, but would be a good source to help, sort of introduce this information into the process? Oh, Christopher Steele, he's out, so that's sort of how that would work. So he would be, if you will, the officially blessed and sanctioned tool to be used in the process. Again, I can't emphasize enough that this was being coordinated. And when I mean coordinated, the head of MI6 would be meeting with Gina Haspel, the chief of station for the CIA, and they'd go over, who's doing what projects are active, what collections are being done, what, whole variety of things. Because the key to all of this is the Clinton Foundation. Alexander Downer, again, close ties to the Clinton Foundation. Richard Dearlove, former head of MI6, close ties to the Clinton Foundation. So this was all about a massive effort to try to destroy Trump in order to boost Hillary.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely shocking. And on the other hand, we have seen building up the demonizing Russia. Was
Yes.
one of the first effort to demonize Russia like the ultimate enemy, and portraying Putin as the ultimate enemy of the United States. Well, actually, Trump was always pretty clear about that. It's not in the interest of the United States to fool enemies, but to build up relationship, even, well, actually, the real enemy is growing up in China. But when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, I am one of those who have been very vocal about my not really conventional vision about this war at the time when I started these documentaries in Ukraine, exposing the real reason for me behind those massive funding of the war, which was completely far away from this fake philanthropy of helping democracy of the most corrupted country in the world that people knew anything about, but started to have flags of Ukraine in front of their houses in America without even knowing what they were talking about, where this country is. So
Right.
what is your view about this massive operation of disinformation, and even when it comes to the conflict, Russia-Ukraine, and this unconditional support that the Biden administration flaunted, dragging into also the
Sure.
European Union bloc?
Well, if you can probably see over my left shoulder, there's a book by Scott Horton called Provoked. It is, I'll call it the Bible of U.S. Abuses and attacks on Russia over the last 34 years. Starting in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States initially made promises to Russia that they weren't going to expand NATO to the east. In fact, Boris Yeltsin made at least 2 requests to join NATO and was rebuffed each time. Vladimir Putin in 1999, 2000 reiterated that request. Hey, why don't you let us join NATO? Let's all, work together. Oh, no, couldn't have that. I mean, by God, if we let Russia into NATO, then we wouldn't be able to justify an almost $1 trillion defense budget. So throughout the 1990s, there was this concerted effort by Western oligarchs. We like to call them capitalists, but these are people intent on raping Russia, taking all of Russia's resources for ourselves. And Putin in 1999, when he came to power, had a meeting, I believe it was in July of 2000. I guess it was called the barbecue. And he got all the Russian oligarchs together and basically told them, hey, this looting of Russia is going to stop. It's going to stop now. You're going to stay out of politics. If you stay out of politics, you can do your work, make your money, but invest that money here in Russia. And if you're not willing to buy those terms, I'll put you in jail. Well, most of them went along with it. Mikhail Khodorkovsky didn't. He wound up going to jail. But over the years, in 2007, Putin made another speech to the NATO countries. I guess it was in Brussels, and basically said, "Hey, stop trying to bring Georgia and Ukraine into NATO."
Exactly.
And the West said, "Screw you." And so they provoked Georgia into the offensive actions against Russia that led to the brief war in August of 2008. And then the Maidan coup that was manufactured and hatched by the United States and MI6, overthrew the elected president, and then installed someone that was, I guess, Poroshenko, who was going to be seen as, a puppet of the West. And then the initiation of the civil war against the Russian speakers in the Donbass. So throughout all of this, I maintain Russia's been victimized. Russia did not try to invade a single country during that period. It only responded when it was attacked in 2008. And it waited until February 2022 after Sergey Lavrov had met with Antony Blinken. And Blinken basically said, we're going to put whatever damn missiles we want into Romania and Poland, and there's not a thing you can do about it. Okay. Thank you. Got message received. Lavrov conveyed that to Putin, and the rest is history. Vladimir Putin decided that Ukraine was intent on building up its military capability to attack Russia. NATO was deliberately funding Ukraine in order to destroy Russia, literally destroy it. They believed if they eliminated Putin, that all problems would be solved. And frankly, Putin created another problem for the West. He was overseeing the restoration of religious faith. The Orthodox Christian faith was very strong, had been reborn, had survived communism, and was now, they built over 1,000 churches during Putin's first 15 years in office. So that, from a moral standpoint, a cultural and ethical standpoint, represents a threat to the West, because the Russians embrace traditional family values. They are children friendly. They are I've been fortunate to visit Moscow now 4 times since December of 2023, Moscow and St. Petersburg and outside of Moscow. Clean,
Beautiful.
safe, modern, none of the madness that you see that infests the cities in the United States.
Larry, let's talk about two things now. Sergey Lavrov and Russia.
Mhm.
It's my understanding that you were recently, you said you've been in Russia 4 times since December of 2023, but you
Right.
were recently, I think just a couple of weeks ago. Can you tell us what the purpose of your trip was and what impressions you had of Russia?
Yeah, I was invited along with Judge Napolitano
Mhm.
Mhm.
and another sort of a guy that's got some fame on Twitter named Maria Nafal. I think he's like considered like a protege of Elon Musk.
Mhm.
We were invited to come in to do a sit down to ask to interview Sergey Lavrov about Russia's foreign policy and particularly issues pertaining to the war in Ukraine. And although we were initially asked to submit our questions in writing in advance, what happened is when we got there, those questions just went out the window.
No.
I didn't ask a single one of the ones I wrote down because the nature of the discussion took us in different directions. And Lavrov turned out to be an extremely, he always comes across as intelligent, speaks multiple languages.
Mhm.
He's really the dean of foreign ministers in the world. But he's also just um, a polite human being. He was a delight to be around, a joy to talk to, quite well versed in his subject matter. And there was no pressure that we had to say this or ask that or no, it was wide open. It was completely free and relaxed. So I think I had been selected because I was known as someone who's presented an objective, fair view of Russia, tried to, in all of my writings and all of the different interviews I do. Um, and yes, I've been accused of being a puppet of Putin and a tool. And
I've been into that. I've been accused of that.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, please, at least, as I actually the last time I was on CNN is on Brian Stelter's program in March of 2017, so 8 years ago now. And during the course of the interview, because it was trying to trap me, he raised the issue, aren't you just a puppet of Putin because you appear on RT? And I said, well, let me educate you. I said, I've been a television talking head since 1994. So I've had, well over, 23 years of doing this. And in the course of that, or in the course of that time, um, the only TV station that has never asked to do a pre-interview to find out what I was going to say in advance was RT.
Yes.
I
Okay.
said CNN, MSNBC, Fox, ABC, CBS, all of them do pre-interviews, BBC, CBC up in Canada.
Hmm.
And then when they hear what you have to say, they're going to go, oh, gee, our show's going in a different direction now. Thanks though. RT was the only one that said, hey, and in fact, on top of that, I had been invited by the Russian delegation to the United Nations to make a presentation before the UN Security Council in April of 2024, which I did. Uh, at no point did anybody from the Russian delegation, none of the ambassadors, neither Nebenzia or Ambassador Polyansky, none of their staff called me up and said, okay, hey, Larry, here's what we want you to say. Or, hey, Larry, here are the points we'd like you to make. I wrote it out. I wrote what I believed to be the truth. Now, I submitted it to them so it could be translated. After it was submitted, they didn't call back and say, hey, we don't like what you said here, or you need to change this. No, it was completely hands off from the Russian government.
Hmm.
So, it says something remarkable about what I call the freedom that exists in Russia. You know, there are some U.S. reporters that complain, oh, they crack down on reporters. They don't allow free reporting. Well, the reality is several of our, the latest one, Ivan Gershkovich of the Wall Street Journal, he was engaged with espionage activities. And I grant you, the line between doing good journalism and espionage can be pretty thin.
Yes.
But Russia has clear proof of Western efforts to use this intelligence to try to destroy and break apart Russia. So are they a little paranoid on that front? Yeah. And they got reason to be paranoid. They have 27 million reasons from World War II.
Yeah.
Yes.
In terms of the fallen victims.
I totally agree with you. As a journalist myself who traveled not to Russia, but to Minsk, to Belarus, who carried a number of interviews, yes, had to be scrutinized, but nobody ever asked me which kind of questions I was going to make. So I totally agree with you on this point by personal experience. And yes, RT also aired my documentary, which never appeared on any other mainstream channel in the United States on Europe, besides video. But when there are such informative work that is based in nothing but history and narration of facts, you mentioned Maidan, you mentioned Yushchenko Poroshenko situation with election and European Union, and have all these actors playing a major role into shaping narratives and fueling conflicts. I think deliver information, and this is something that our media system didn't allow American citizens to earn. So basically, I think we're still much indoctrinated by these opinionists, political activists, these tools of InfoWars, rather than real journalists who narrate facts. So thank you for your work and for your fearless exposure, fearless commitment to expose facts, because I know what it means to be named and shamed as something you're not, just for doing a good work.
Well, thank you too for doing what you're doing, because, as I commented to some other friends of late, there's not a single voice that would speak and present the Russian position with respect to Ukraine and what's going on that's allowed on any of the cable news shows, any of the regular mainstream news shows. None whatsoever. The last one to actually be given a platform was Doug McGregor when he was allowed on Tucker Carlson, but that's been well over 2 years ago. And so we have to go to alternative media like this. And people actually more and more are watching this and paying attention to it. So I applaud you for the two of you having the courage to do this.
Thank you, Larry. And just a last question, and this has been a fascinating interview because many people do watch this program, and we want to make sure that somebody with your insights is able to articulate those viewpoints for what we believe is now the mainstream audience. We think that, especially on channels like X, people are more tuned into X now than probably the tube nightly. So if you could advise President Trump right now on two things. The first would be, how do you hold the deep state accountable for what they did regarding the operation that you laid out in this conversation in 2015? And secondly, how should the United States recalibrate its foreign policy approach to Russia post-Russia collusion hoax and second Trump victory? Thank you.
Well, okay. So first, I think Trump has really taken the right steps by removing the clearances of all those who were involved. The 51 intelligence officers who came out to claim that the Hunter Biden laptop was likely Russian disinformation. And just by, for your full disclosure, I am personal friends with the kid, JP, who is the laptop repairman. I was actually friends with his father. I knew his father before I knew JP, but so I know him. And one of those 51 intelligence officers that claimed that this was misinformation, Steve Hall. Steve was another one of my classmates in the career trainee program. So, I knew Steve back when he was just a 22-year-old snot-nosed kid. But so Trump, in pulling all of those clearances from these people, that's the most important thing, getting them out. I think there ought to be some prosecutions, but Trump doesn't make that call. that's going to have to be both Kash Patel doing investigation, collecting evidence, and Bondi, Pam Bondi doing, finding the appropriate indictments. As far as recalibrating our foreign policy, we've got to start with our what we call it the annual threat assessment, which was published on Friday. That thing is an anachronism because it doesn't take an honest look at what really are the threats. How do we measure a threat? So I measure a threat this way. What's killing the most Americans? Is it the Russians killing Americans? Or is it ISIS killing Americans? No, it's the drug cartels killing Americans. And they're doing it in part with the assistance of China through the synthetic narcotics. So let's write the threat assessment. Let's start with what's killing the most Americans. Let's identify that. What represents the greatest threat to America's economic health and well-being? And so within that, Russia doesn't even make the list of a threat because Russia is not a threat.
Mm-hmm.
However, we have to continue claiming that it's a threat in order to justify building up the budget. So that's where what Trump, that really needs to change. I'm hoping Tulsi Gabbard can bring that about, but not entirely confident that she's can do it. But that's what needs to be done.
Fascinating conversation, Larry. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
Where people can find you?
I'm at sonar21.com, SONAR21.com. And it has all the links to different social media that I try to put out my publications. I consider myself sort of like a dairy farmer of the blogosphere. Dairy farmers have to milk the cows every day. So I try to write something every day.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.